evening, everybody. Welcome you all once again to our second lecture series in general surgery. I welcome you all, and I would hand over the proceedings to our president, Dr. Niranjan Agarwal, to take over Dr. Niranjan Agarwal.
Thank you, Rajesh. A very warm evening and welcome to the second series of the lecture series in MSS. Today we have eminent speakers speaking on very common topics like IV insertion and its maintenance. Then we'll have the various type of drains and how to set up a surgical clinic. What are the do's and don'ts? And we have tried to have the best speakers around. And I must thank them all because they are doing this job at a very short notice because our preparation for this MSS series started a bit late. So the initial topics we had to give very less time to the presenters to prepare. And I'm so happy that all my good friends, Geeta, Anil sir, and Roy has agreed to do this in a very short period of time. So a huge thank you to all three of you. Today also happens to be the birthday of our immediate past president, Dr. Naresh Rao, who is also the chairperson. So, very happy birthday on behalf of all the delegates, Naresh.
Thank you.
The third series next Friday again has got some very common and important topic which everybody should register. That is uh, urinary catheterization to be presented by Dr. Mukunandankar, who is a professor at Nayar Hospital in Urology. Daycare surgery do's and don'ts by none other than Dr. Naresh Rao, and various surgical incisions and their various surgical positions to be taken by Dr. Chandrakant Sable. So, friends, request you to keep logging on every Friday and pass on the message which we send it to you to all your PGs and as well as undergraduate because it's going to help them also. We are going to have mainly practical tips. After hearing to Dr. Anil Parak's talk, you'll realize it is not a mainly theoretical talk. It is usually a practical talk which will help not only the PGs or the UGs but also the practicing surgeons. And what is new in this today's era where we must have probably learned it many years ago or a few decades ago. So please join us. Let's take the best advantage of the situation which COVID has put us through. It is better to be safe. Earlier, government tried to play Ramayana and Mahabharat. Now we are playing the MSS series for at least for our members. So be safe, be at home, and log in. Over to you for the chairpersons, Rajesh. Please introduce them.
Yeah, thank you, Niranjan. So I call upon our birthday boy, Dr. Naresh Rao, uh, past president, Mumbai Surgical Society. Is associated with Mumbai Surgical Society since its inception, that is 2014. He was a founder member. Naresh has organized almost all the CMEs, and he had been present for all our CMEs of Mumbai Surgical Society. I think he must have not missed a single CME. And I distinctly remember Naresh contribution to Mumbai Surgical Society because he's the person who probably opens up the curtains for the CME, and till the last person is gone, Naresh is always there. And of course, Naresh is a, versatile surgeon. He has his own daycare center at Babulnath. And our second chairperson is Dr. Shishir Shetty. Dr. Shishir, is he around there? Anyway, Dr. Shishir is a renowned oncosurgeon. He's practicing at Apollo Vashi. He's been practicing for more than 26 years. And Dr. Shishir has headed a lot of associations, and he is a versatile surgeon himself. So I'll call upon Dr. Shishir and Dr. Naresh Rao to introduce our speakers and to start the proceedings. Naresh.
Thank you, Rajesh, for such a wonderful introduction. And I must congratulate Niranjan and you for starting this series, though it is just in the beginning. But I see the response and the enthusiasm, and I'm sure that this is going to be a thumping success as usual. Uh, without wasting too much time, let me start with the first speaker, who is Dr. Anil Parak. Anil Parak, sir, and myself, we are associated since Bombay Hospital days. I think maybe more than 25 years back when I was a senior resident and sir had just joined as a consultant. And I know him and I've been with him. He has been with me together in our growth in Mumbai. Sir is an anesthetist par excellence, and he is presently the head of the Department of Anesthesia at Global Hospital here, and also he is the Secretary General of the Neuroanesthesia of Association of Mumbai. Sir is going to speak on intravenous access and maintenance. I now hand over the screen to you, sir. Please go ahead with your lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Naresh, for the introduction, and I thanks the MSS for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences. Though it looks a very simple topic, but when I started preparing my talk, I even learned a lot of good things. So I'll just share with you. So intravenous maintenance. So the aim of intravenous management is safe, effective delivery of treatment without discomfort or tissue damage and without compromising the venous access, especially if long-term therapy is proposed. So there are different types of venous access. It can be like peripheral intravenous cannulas, midline or extended peripheral venous cannula, which is a relatively new, which even these cannulas are not still available with us. Only few centers have these, and peripheral introduced central venous catheters, that is PICC lines, which are very familiar to us, and central venous catheter CVC, which can be tunneled or untunneled. Another is the total implantable venous access device. So when we decide what line is to be put, so this is an excellent decision tree which will help you all to know which line is to be introduced what time. So if IV access is needed, then if available peripheral IV access sites are available, yes, then we have to decide depending on the length and the type of the therapy. If IV access is needed less than a week, then adequate access for a site rotation, we can do different sites of intravenous cannula. And if intravenous access is needed for 1 to 4 weeks, then, and if your requirement of infusion of drugs are like normal pH, then midline or extended dwelling peripheral cannulas can be inserted. And if IV access is needed for 4 weeks to 1 year, or when we are giving hypertonic or vesicant or pH extreme drugs, then PICC line is important. PICC line can be inserted. When there is no peripheral IV line access is available, then depending on the length and the type of the therapy, IV access needed if suppose less than 3 weeks, then non-tunnel central venous insertion catheter can be inserted. And if the long-term or the chronic IV access is needed, considering the patient's daily activities, we can implanted venous access device or tunnel catheters. So this is a just brief introduction of what type of different lines are available. So just peripheral line intravenous cannulas, as you know, it's the indications. You all know fluid electrolyte replacement, administration of medications, administration of blood or products, nutritional supplementation, and blood sampling. The advantage of IV infusion is that it's immediate effects and control over the rate of administration can be done. Patient cannot tolerate certain drugs like orally, so it can be introduced intravenously. And there is a predictable action, and pain and irritation of subcutaneous injection intramuscular can be avoided. The equipment required for peripheral venous cannulization, all know about the basic equipment tray is required, which contains the gloves, IV cannula, tourniquet, dressing to secure the cannula, alcohol swab, saline flush and the sterile syringe or fluid administration, and sharp bin. So this is a simple tray which is prepared for intravenous cannulization, which has all the material which I already told you. Equipment preparations is, I'm not going into detail, but it's you have to wear a non-sterile glove and open all the material which are required, which I already told on the open tray. Then flush the lines, which are extension lines, before you start the procedure. Preparation of the patient as well as the environment is more important, because you have to collect all the equipment, explain the procedure to the patients. Patients, please provide privacy, adjust the height of the bed and comfortable working, place the patient in a comfortable position, select the site on the non-dominant arm, which is very important. Most of the time, the staff put on the right side when the patient is right-handed. So this is a small thing, but it's very important to select the non-dominant arm. Provide a good source of light and call for assistance if needed. The other different veins, the anatomically, if you see, which are the commonly we use the cephalic, basilic vein, or dorsal metacarpal veins, which are there on the dorsum of the hand. On the forearm veins, we have mainly cephalic vein, median cubital vein, and basilic veins. Why I'm insisting on the identification of suitable vein? Because the patency and the long lasting depends on how good vein you select during insertion. So what are the signs of the good vein? This should be bouncy, it should be soft, it should be above previous puncture site, refills when you depress it, visible and have a large lumen, well supported, straight, and easily palpable. So these are the for selection is very important. And what vein should be avoided? It's like thrombosed veins, sclerosed, fibrosed, inflamed and bruised vein, thin and the fragile veins, veins over the mobile area, near bony prominences, areas the site of infections and have undergone multiple previous puncture suppose, and do not use if the patient has the IV line of the same vein. Do not insert cannula on the site of the mastectomies, AV fistulas, and cortex. If suppose they have a cortex graft in the vein. So when you are inserting these cannula, you must be sure about where you are doing your work. The size of the cannula is very important because depending on the uses, suppose is a traumatic patient, you have to have a large bore like 14 gauge or the 16 gauge cannulas, which are colored different. And depending on the size of the cannula, we can have the infusion rate of like 240 ml to 13 ml, which is in 26 gauge cannula. Now, the safety cannulas are the new cannulas used to needle prick injuries, which are very common nowadays. So as soon as this stellate is out, there is a wing which is opens and it prevents the injury or needle pricks. Scalp vein, which are rarely used nowadays, but only for the temporary or short procedure can be used. And sometimes even now, it's a very important device to collect the blood when the difficult vein are there. The scalp vein set are for collection of the blood sample. This is a small video. I'm not. I'll just. It's a 1 minute video. I'll just. So keep this hand straight. Note this angle. Just see the. So this the double flash technique is very important. So once we puncture, you see the blood, the needle flash. But many times without seeing this cannula, there's a catheter flash. We just push the cannula. So if you don't see this blood into this catheter, and if you're pushing, many times it goes out. So this is the double flashback technique. So when you have to see the blood in the needle as well as in the catheter flash. Here are the different types of dressings which are available, and always use the transparent dressings, and the puncture site has to be kept open. Now, documentation of the procedure is very important because in our setup, nobody do these things. So it's better to have a day and time, the site and the size of the cannula, any problem suppose you encounter, review the data, whether it's longer than 72 hours without the appropriate risk assessment, and thank the patient once you take, clean up and dispose the rubbish. So these are the peripheral intravenous cannula best practice guidelines, which has been, I have gone through these, and there are a lot of good information. I'll request all of you to go through this. And the best thing I liked was about the peripheral IV cannula record form, which were available in these guidelines. And every time when staff, there are 3 shifts in our hospital. So every time the staff when comes, they check the dressing, they check the hub disinfection and VIP score, which I'll tell you in a while. And after the discharge, these patients, this goes into the patient record. Vein finder is important for difficult IV lines and can demarcate walls in the bifurcation. So the principle is that the infrared light is projected onto the viewing area and is absorbed at the location where the blood or the blood vein in the blood which is running in the vein reside. And with the light is absorbed and there is a less light reflection. So you can just see there. This is a small video where you can see how the veins looks when you are in the vein finder. I have used this for many times, but I think this requires little practice. And still, because I'm not still used to this. As in in a laparoscopic surgery, when we switch on from the open to laparoscopy, there is some definitely learning curve. I think I'm going through the same way. Ultrasonography can be used for peripheral venous access also when the arms are swollen or the dark colored skin patients particularly, when very difficult to identify the veins. We can use these probes and identify the vein, and with the color drop we can just see whether it is a vein or the artery if we are not able to show with the compression of the vein, which is the salient feature of the vein with the sonography. Potential complications are extravasation, hematoma formation, phlebitis. I'm not going much detail, but I'll just show you what disasters can occur with the extravasation. Here, the phlebitis is the inflammation of the vein, and this is the like three types: mechanical, chemical, and infective. Like this, in this patient, the inflammation in the clot occurred because during insertion there was a trauma to the vein and the thrombosis formed. This is the chemical phlebitis, which is complicated with the amphotericin injection. The treatment of phlebitis, you all know, is the arm raising, apply the warm compression of the area, removal of IV line if suppose there is a phlebitis, NSAID to reduce the pain and the swelling, and application of thrombophobe, heparin jelly, magnesium sulfate. I don't know whether they help or not, but this is the treatment which should be prescribed. This is a very important to know the visual infusion phlebitis score. That is a VIP score that is known as that. So these have a score 0 to 5 gradient scores. If IV site appears healthy, that is 0. When the score is 1, one of the following is evident, like there is a slight pain near the IV site or there is a slight redness near the IV, so it gets 1 score. So possible, just be observant about the cannula. 2 of the following are evident, like IV site, erythema, and the swelling. After these, if 2 are there, then this is early sign of phlebitis. When there is a pain in the path of the cannula, erythema, or induration, this is a medium stage of the phlebitis. And all of the following, like pain, cannula, erythema, induration, and palpable venous cord is there, then this is the score 4 and consider treatment. And when the fever comes, then you have to start the immediate treatment. IV hematomas are very common. You will see many times these pictures in our clinical practice. IV site infections, very common. Cellulitis, when there is an extravasation and then there is an infection superadded. Infiltration, whenever there is extravasation and there is a lot of tissue necrosis can occur, particularly in inotrope when the vasoconstriction agents are going on. So I am just interested in the prevention of the complications. So important is to perform the proper hand hygiene, don gloves, and use antiseptic techniques during IV insertion and later also. Avoid veins that are very small and the fragile. Select an appropriate IV site. Avoid other flexions. Use proper venipuncture technique. Clean injection port before each use and observe the IV site frequently, and advise the patient to report any swelling or the tenderness at the site, intravenous site. When flushing an extension line, use the clamp to provide a positive pressure at the end of the flush to avoid the red cell. What happens when as soon as you turn the bivalve, which is there in the extension tube, but still this allows some blood to come from the vein to the tip of the cannula. So when you push these clamps, which are there in clave connectors or extension lines, then it increases the pressure of that, and whatever the blood comes at the tip, it is again goes into the vein. The flush and the pre and the post bolus must occur at least 5 ml of the IV normal saline and Haplok solution. Most of the practice I seen that they use distilled water, which is not should not be used. The thrombophlebitis sets early with the distilled water. With intermittent medication therapy infusion the line, the flush must post administration to be 30 ml of 0.9% of normal saline to ensure the patient there. What happens then if you give if you prescribe any antibiotic, then what sister does is that she put anything or the chemotherapeutic agent into the 100 ml saline. And once that over, she just disconnects. She never flushes that particular line. So you have to put a fresh 100 ml normal saline bag and then flush the entire set with the line about 30 ml of the fluid later on. Cannula must be flushed with 0.9 ml of normal saline at least once per shift to maintain the patency. Many times, suppose the treatment is OD, they don't touch the IV line till the next morning, which is wrong. So we have to just flush with 0.9% normal saline every 8 hourly. Administrator must document these flush and medication chart to increase the traceability. Extension set minimize the cannula movement. So what happens when you connect these extension line, whenever you are turning the bivalve, there is a movement in the cannula. So this produces a mechanical phlebitis. So never attach these three-way directly to the cannula. You must attach with the extension line and then the cannula. So never use these things. These are the cheaper and easily available, but I think these are produces more phlebitis. Haplok solution, which are commonly now available, which are the pre-filled syringes also, the ampule also, and there is a vial also. So depending on your size, your patient, you can use it. Clave connectors are effective barrier against the bacterial transfer and the colonization, and reduces the risk of the bloodstream infections. They are the needle-free connectors which can be attached to the extension line and the cannula, designed to enhance the patient's safety. There is a straight fluid path and minimize the residual volume helps to maximize the effectiveness. So whenever the residual volume is less, when you're flushing, it's the effective flush. Even in the extension lines, which suppose are longer, then whatever the flush, they are not effective. So that is the reason these clave connectors with the extension lines are very important, and they reduces the catheter occlusion by at least 50%. So these are the clave connectors that can be single, that can be single lumen, they can be double, they can be triple. So they are the silicone seals with internal cannula minimize the point of entry to the bacteria. That's very important. And the syringe is directly connected, and without needle, you can push the drugs and then you can give the drugs to the cannula. So clave connectors enhance the patient safety. They reduces the reflux and maintain the catheter patency, and it efficiently clear the connector with a low flush volume and reduces the bloodstream infection. Peripheral venous cannula are the other care how you can take whenever there is a peripheral cannula are removed and replaced when there is a clinical indicators which are like VIP score of more than 2 or the greater. Whenever there is a dysfunction cannula like resistant venous flushing and cannula dislodge or kinking. This is a nice paper which I saw, the intraoperative fluid management during mastectomy. In a clinical practice, when we are doing mastectomy, we are putting the blood pressure cuff on the same arm where the intravenous fluid is going on. So this was the paper they have published that they put a pressure bag, which is the pressure of 50 millimeter above the blood pressure and continuously infuse. So what happened whenever there is a blood flush back, this produces the accumulation of the RBCs and the thrombus formation in this collection, and then later on thrombus, and then the phlebitis set is early. So the Intrafix safe set, which is the back checked valve, this is easily available in Bombay market also. So in all patients, like an orthopedics, when fracture is there on the right side and we are using left side, or mastectomy, we use these types of back checked valve. So this when applied, when we are using these, even the blood pressure when inflated, this doesn't, there is no back pressure from the vein, blood comes into the cannula. And you can see that even the blood pressure cuff was on, the drop which is not sucked in or the drop is still hanging there. Whenever you are giving IV set, that has to be every 7, if suppose you are not disconnected, then it should be can be used for 72 hours. But whenever you're disconnected the IV set from the cannula, it should not be reused. Particularly continuous IV blood or the blood products like blood filters and have to be changed every 8 hourly. And cyclosporine and the suppose you are giving TPN lines has to be changed every 24 hours. Pediatric lines, I'm just giving, not taking detail, but only thing I want to note that whenever you are putting a pediatric line, there has to be attention distractors. You can use these different toys. Now mobile is the best way. You can give to child and they are happy and then you can take. Amla cream is applied with a non-broken skin, and this is the amla cream which can be applied with on the skin. And but only unfortunate thing, you have to wait for a longer time. It's a 30 to 45 minutes you have to wait before the IV insertion. So then it becomes painless. Now beautiful splints are available to secure the pediatric IV lines, and these are the covered also now available. This is the something new which midline peripheral intravenous cannula. So what happened in the, like in a PICC line, when you are introducing the PICC line from the peripheral line, the catheter goes up to the heart. In these are the special catheter which are now new in the market, which are 8 to 25 centimeter in length, usually placed in the upper arm veins such as the brachial on the cephalic, and the distal ends proximal to the level of the axilla. So it's at the level of axilla only, anterior axillary line, and it's can be kept for 6 to 8 weeks time. But the insertion technique is like Selzinger techniques. It's not a direct cannula. So this is the difference between PICC lines. The PICC lines goes up to the heart from the periphery. The midline catheters goes up to the anterior axillary line. The extended dwell peripheral intravenous cannula, these are smaller size catheters. These are 6 to 8 centimeter silicone catheter for peripheral vein insertion. This can be directly punctured from the vein and from the heart, and this is 8 centimeters into the vein. But these are silicone catheters and can be kept for at least 3 weeks to 4 weeks time. Central venous catheters, as you know, the central venous catheters are indwelling devices that is peripherally inserted into the large of the central veins. The regular site, you all know, the internal jugular vein, subclavian vein, or the axillary vein, femoral vein, and peripherally inserted central venous catheter. So these are the different types of different sites which we can use for the central venous catheter. Indications are, all you know, is a long-term intravenous antibiotic, TPN therapy, brain medication, chemotherapeutic agents. When particularly you are using the calcium chloride, chemotherapeutic agent, hypertonic saline, potassium chloride, the central line is needed. Frequent blood draws are there, and monitoring of the central venous catheter, CVP. These are types of CVC catheters, which can be single lumen, double lumen, and the triple lumen. As I told you, these CVC catheter can be tunnel catheters, they can be PICC line, and there can be non-tunnel catheters. The catheters can be like single lumen, double lumen, triple lumen, other maybe 4 lumen also. The equipment required are, the more important is to explain the procedure to the patient and the family members in advance, and explain the need of the central line, why we have to justify why we are putting the central line, and what are the benefits and the risk and the complication has to be explained to the patients beforehand, and the consent has to be taken for the central line. Equipment required, the sterile, everything you have to put either in the ward with the sterile precautions. You have to like sterile trolleys, gown, gloves, mask, central line kits, flush, chlorhexidine, lidocaine, if you are putting in the local suture material, scalpel, and the central line fixation material. So most of the central lines are put with the Selzinger techniques. Procedure, I'm not going into the details of procedure because everybody knows about that, but I'll just explain in these. So the steps of the CVC are the first steps when you directly puncture the catheter, the vein. In the second step, you put the wire into the vein. In the third step, you just remove the cannula and secure the wire into the vein. And the fourth step is when you're putting the dilator into the vein, dilating the catheter, dilating the vein. In the fifth stage, you put the catheter, but the wire is still on. And the last stage is where you put the central venous catheter into the vein and the wire is out. So these are the different pictures of the different stages of the central venous CVC insertion. So this is the dilatation, this is the dilators, this is the putting the catheters, always make sure the aspiration from all the cannulas, all the 3 or 2 lumen or 1 lumen. And then once the aspiration is there, flush the cannula line and then fixation and the dressing is very important. So these are the application, how you apply. For these are the chlorhexidine patch based dressing which are put on the central venous catheters. The puncture site has to be open and it should be visible through this dressing. This chlorhexidine prevent the local infection. These are the other material which is used, biopatch, which are chlorhexidine impregnated antimicrobial disc-like structure, which is just put around the catheter before the fixation. What about the ultrasonograph guided central venous catheter becoming standard practice for the care now? Vein is compressible. When you vein are compressible and the artery is not compressible. So when you identify the internal jugular vein, you just press it and then it becomes compressible. Vein is accessible under direct visualization, helpful in patients, particularly in coagulopathic like liver transplant or any patient whose INR is high. We don't want a blind puncture. We use the ultrasonography or particularly in difficult anatomy. The other different stages of the USG. This vein is compressible. Once you put the needle, this is the needle tip, and once you put the wire, you can see the shadow of the wire. And this is on the out of the plane, and this in plane you can see the entire length of the wire to the USG probe. Subclavian is the approach is positioning is particularly we prefer the right side subclavian because of the straight course. Supine position head is tilted on the other side, and needle placement is at the junction of 1/3 and 2/3 of the clavicle. The deltopectoral groove directed to the sternal notch. You can use ultrasonography for the subclavian CVC insertion also. These are the different advanced venous catheters, which are like large bore. Like there are 9 French catheters, which are used for the rapid infusion of fluid, particularly in trauma patients, where you can just, or second important thing, when even you can pass this one Gans catheter or temporary pacemaker wire through this, and this can be used for the infusion. The other types of the catheters are available: antimicrobial coated, silver impregnated, antibiotic coated, and chlorhexidine, silver sulfadizine, microcycline, or rifampicillin impregnated catheters are available in the market. Even heparin coated CVC catheters are available, which are they say the less blood infectious, less incidences of infection in these catheters. PICC line, as you know, the PICC line is a large catheter which is inserted through the peripheral line. Under the sonography, we just identification of the vein, mainly this vein, and once the identification, we puncture the vein, and through that a wire is passed, and then over that the catheter is passed. This comes up to the SVC as the right atrial junction. PCC line, PICC line can be used for the long-term intravenous antibiotics, nutrition, on the medication, and for the blood draws. So these are PICC lines which we are using at our hospital. A lot of patients, we are getting lot of mucormycosis patients. So all the antifungal drugs which are given with the PICC lines. Now, tunnel catheter, the catheter is tunnel under the skin. These can be preferable sites are neck, chest, and the groin. Indications are like chemotherapy, nutrition, and fluid infusion and the blood samples. So these are the 2 types of the tunnel catheter, which are open-handed when there is no clamp, and that is the Gauchon CVC catheters, and the closed-ended clamp is like Hickman's, which we are commonly uses. They have a cuff, so there is no suture on the skin. The cuff is underneath the skin, and this cuff prevents the pull or the coming out of the catheter from the central venous or vein. The totally implantable venous access devices are the devices that which we use as the chemoport, which are totally, we put as a central venous catheter. The catheter length is cut according to the patient's height, and we see under the C-arm before we fix it. And the catheters are cut and then tunneled from the neck up to the infraclavicular region. So infraclavicular region. and we make an incision there and put this device port there. The only thing is we have to use a Huber needle is specially designed with the hollow needle used with the chemotherapy port. The needle has a long bevel tip which can go through the skin as well as through the silicon septum and implanted port with a wire. So this is put from the like in this patient the jugular vein and there's a tunnel, and in the infraclavicular region the port is fixed. These are the special type of needle which are punctured to the skin and it punctures the diaphragm silicon, and then you have to flush and take care of the catheter as in the central catheters which are doing. Positioning, confirmation of position is very important for each after central venous catheters. The complication of CVC are bleeding, infection, puncture of the adjacent structures such as other veins of the artery, air embolism, collapse of the pneumothorax, hemothorax, and catheter breakage can happen. These are the tips to avoid problems in the CVC. Always wash your hands before touching your CVC catheters. Don't use scissors, safety pins, or other sharp objects near your catheters. Keep the dressing clean and dry. Tape the tube to your body so it doesn't get tugged out of the place, and the central line must be flushed every day with heparin or saline to keep it clear of blood and to prevent clotting. So this is like in our hospital, we have a sterile towel with a ready-made CVC central venous dressing. So after this is a towel which is we fix all the cannulas in this towel and just cover it. Haplok procedure in a brief. So whenever you are using these cannulas, first you have to flush every cannula with the saline, and the second flush has to be again with the heparin Haplok. So in summary, IV access is very important aspect of medical practice. It's easy with experienced person, but have a lot of complications. Post-insertion care is the most important to avoid the complications, and strict supervision and documentation is essential. Thank you.
Naresh, you can take the questions. Excellent talk, Dr. Anil.
Okay.
Anil Parak, I'm Dr. Shishir Shetty. I'm a cancer surgeon.
Yeah.
So we use a lot of.
Sorry, I am trying to unmute. Yeah. So
Very interesting lecture.
Yes, sir.
And quite details. I think it's gonna help.
Very,
with the
am I audible?
quite a lot of basics in it.
So very nice talk, sir. Quite in depth. There are some question answers
Yeah.
which I will just ask you. In the question answers chat, Dr. Manmohan Kamath has asked antibiotic coated cannula. Are they available?
Yeah, rifampicin is available. I don't know about this. There's a Cook's catheters which are available initially, but I'm not aware of just now. And silver impregnated are available from the Vigon.
Okay.
They are available.
Okay. Another question from Dr. Kamath is how long PICC lines can be kept?
It can be kept for 1 year also maximum.
Okay.
Suppose you maintain it well, it can be kept for 1 year. So
Okay.
to 4 weeks to 1 year. That's the maximum time they give.
Okay. And that's the same question asked. How many days can keep the PIC line
Dr. Naresh.
and midline? Yes.
PICC, if it is very well maintained, sometimes we use it for 2 years also.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there have been patients where we have maintained it for 2.5 years. But very careful, proper dressing. We have a dedicated nurse. So PICC line, we have a dedicated nurse for that, and we have given long-term chemotherapy.
The other important thing is PICC line are very comfortable for the patient as compared to the other line, which like the jugular or something,
Yes.
or
Yes.
chemo port, and every time we have to puncture the skin and they feel the pain. So PIC line is very important.
Right. Question from Dr. Niranjan Agarwal is vein visualizer available and where is it available?
Yes, so there are different types of vein. In Indian version is available even on Amazon. It may be around 2,500. But it is very small. but I was not happy with these Amazon. It is very, but the best one is like which cost around 4.5 lakhs rupees, which comes with a stand. So you can just mount that in the your OT, and whenever there is a difficult vein or something, you can just take it. So these are that is a 5 lakhs. That's an Indian other version which is relatively available in a like nursing homes. Buy you can buy around 10 to 15,000 bucks. I don't know the company, but there is an Indian version which can be buy in the 10 to 15,000 rupees on.
So, sir, we have come a long way. I remember we used to do venisections in the
Yeah,
ward when we were not able to put in a central line.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. So I was
yes,
just going
wonderful.
to include that section, but I thought now it's outdated. People will laugh
Yes,
on
it
the
is,
me,
it
but
is, it is, it
I
is, it is. So
yeah.
another question
I,
is, sorry,
Dr.
Shishir.
Rao, I
Yeah,
really wouldn't call it outdated. Sometimes when
it
you
works. Yes, for a surgeon, yes, a venesection works wonderfully well,
no,
and we are,
sometimes when you don't get any lines,
yes, I
and even
agree.
on ultrasound, sometimes you have to do an open cut down to put a PICC or a
Absolutely.
central.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, the trick is that, very early we used to start doing venisections and putting the central cannula through the venesection and then closing it so that at the end of the requirement, just pull it out. So there
Yeah.
is no damage to the vein. There is no ligation of the vein. And probably the younger generation can learn this, that some of the old tricks do work. And you should always keep in the back of your mind that, yes, when push comes to shove, you can definitely fall back on these old methods and, don't get caught in doing more and more expensive work.
No, venesection was very common in pediatric patient initially when there were no central line. People are scared of put central line in pediatric patient. A lot of bachu we are done with the in the lower limb, like greater saphenous vein, we are done venesection.
Right, right.
And even
So,
in burns patient, a lot of burns patient we are seeing
exactly,
doing.
yes. So next question is, which is the best place to put CVC?
So it depends on your expertise. The complications are least with internal jugular
The
as
rate of
compared to
infection, the rate of infection is what the query is.
yes, the rate of infection highest with the femoral.
Okay, this is a question from Dr. Jose.
Yeah.
Now, the other question, Dr. Ashok Donde. Analgesics or antibiotic injection are to be diluted in 100 ml normal saline and given, or sometimes we add injection into the ongoing saline bottle. Correct way to guide, please guide.
Now, see what happened when you're putting these antibiotics in like 500 ml solution and all, they are not worth because that should not be done. All the antibiotic is prescribed, it has to be in a 100 ml bottle. And once that 100 ml is over, put another 100 ml saline and infuse 30 ml of that. So all the antibiotic which is in the IV set as well as there in the IV cannulas and all, it flush away.
Doesn't get wasted.
Yes,
Yes,
and don't
yes.
waste it. So even if you see in the IV set, if you aspirate through the IV set, you will see around 8 to 9 ml of the dead space fluid will come when you collect. So that is wasted. So if suppose you are giving 1 gram, so your patient will receive 900 and you just disconnect and hang that intravenous set over the stand. So most of the nursing home you will see there are 3 bottle lying and every time there are new set, but every time 10 ml of the fluid is wasted. So if you're using the same IV set, once that 100 ml antibiotic is over, put another normal saline 100 ml and infuse 30 ml of the saline. That's the way.
Right. So I think, sir, we have covered most of the questions and we are way beyond the time.
So what I will request Dr. Anil Parak to just see the chat. If there are any questions left
I'll
unanswered,
answer.
he can directly answer on
Yes,
the chat.
sir. I'll do that.
Yes.
Thank you. Naresh, go for the next speaker.
Yes. So
Thank
Shishir,
you.
thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
My
And nice
pleasure.
touching on to you. Shishir, please go ahead.
So the next speaker is been, we have been to school together. We have been, I know her for a long time. We were co-lecturers, although she was a year senior to me. And now she is the head, Dr. Geeta is the head of the unit of surgery at Cooper Hospital. I invite Dr. Geeta to take over for her lecture. Hi, Geeta, you're around?
Unmute yourself, Geeta.
Hello, Geeta, you're there?
Amit, can you help unmute her?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Can you unmute Geeta Ghag? Yeah, there she is.
Hi, Geeta.
Hi,
Shishir
hi,
here.
Shishir. Yeah.
Please start.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting me for giving a talk on drains today. Drains are a very important aspect of surgical practice. Drains are the appliances which act as deliberate channels through which established or potential collection of blood, pus, or body fluid egress to allow gradual collapse and apposition of tissues. So drains are used to evacuate the contents of the body systems as well as collections that accumulate in the body after the surgery. The body systems in which the drains are used, which we routinely use, but we don't realize at times that they are drains, are urinary catheters, gastrointestinal catheters like Ryle's tube, and nasojejunal tubes, which are used to drain the contents of the body cavities. Also, the drains are used to evacuate excess secretions of the body cavities like pleural and peritoneal cavities, most common to drain pleural effusion and to drain collections after the surgery. Tissue fluids like blood, serum, and lymph and chyle can be drained with the help of the drains. And drains help eliminate dead space and prevent potential accumulation of the space. So the indications of drains are therapeutic, palliative, diagnostic, prophylactic, for monitoring, and as an access route. Coming to each indication, the therapeutic indications are in case of tension pneumothorax or pleural effusion, in which case the fluid is drained. In tension pneumothorax, air is drained, and it is an emergency condition in which the immediate insertion of a cannula relieves the patient of severe pain, and it can be life-saving. Also, the drainage of abscess cavity, seroma drainage, acute urinary retention, and nasobiliary tube are indications of therapeutic drain insertion. Palliative drain insertions are in cases of hydrocephalus and in cases of CA esophagus. So it exactly is not a drain. We call it stent, but it does help bypass the obstruction, and the patient is able to at least swallow and eat. The diagnostic indications of drain are in cases of T-tube cholangiogram, where we want to see whether there are any retained stones or before removal of the T-tube. Also CBD cannulation. Prophylactic indications are post-operative drains in the abdomen and chest. Also in the after the surgeries where we have raised flaps, or there are cavities after the surgeries, we don't want the fluid to collect inside, and because it can be a potential for infection, we put drains prophylactically. Monitoring of the drains, again, the example is urinary catheterization, Ryle's tube insertion, where you, after urinary catheterization, we see whether the drain, how much is the urine output and whether the resuscitation is adequate or not. And in nasogastric tube insertion, after the insertion, whatever is the drainage, depending on, it can help us in volume replacement, both urinary catheterization as well as nasogastric tube insertion. Also, the drains can be used as access route for example, in percutaneous nephrolithotomy for removal of the stones. Now, coming to the mechanism, there are two main mechanisms by which the drains drain. That is the gravitational force and the pressure mechanism. Now, efficacy of a drain depends on the diameter and length of the drain, the consistency and viscosity of the fluid which it is draining, and also the pressure that is applied. There are different types of drains, and there are different ways of classifying the drains. So based on mechanism, the drains can be passive or active. Based on the nature of the drain that is used, the drains can be tube drains or sheet drains. Depending on the disposition, the drains can be open or closed. Depending on the location, the drains can be internal drains or external drains. And depending on what is the property of the material, it can be inert or irritant. there is an overlap. Mainly the drains are passive or active, and open or closed, and then the remaining classification in which there is an overlap of examples, because mainly they are either open or closed. Coming to the passive drains act by mechanism of capillary action or the fluctuation of intracavity pressure. The examples are corrugated drains or Penrose drains. Active drains are the drains that are aided by suction, which could be low continuous suction, low intermittent, or high suction. The examples of active drains are Jackson-Pratt drain, Romovac drain. Sump drain is also an example of active drain. Now, coming to the difference between the active and passive drains, there are multiple differences, and there are advantages and disadvantages of active and passive drains. The active drain works by active suction, whereas passive drain depends on the pressure differential between the two cavities or a cavity and the exterior. The pressure gradient is negative pressure in cases of active drains. Here, the gradient is positive. The drain exit site, the dependent position is necessary for active drain, not necessary for active drains, whereas for passive drains, the position should be dependent. The dressing for active drains is minimal or not needed, whereas for passive drains, it is bulky to absorb fluid. The measurement of effluent is quite reliable in active drains, whereas in passive drains, it is difficult to quantify unless you have applied a stoma bag to the drains. Then fluid recollection is less likely. Whereas in passive drains, the fluid can collect because the cavity is not opposing, there is no negative gradient, so fluid can keep accumulating. The chances of retrograde infection are lower in active drains compared to passive drains. And obstruction to the drain can occur in case of active drains only if the caliber is smaller. But it can occur because there is a lumen or tube, whereas in case of passive drain, it does not get obstructed by and large. The radiological studies are easy to perform with active drains compared to the passive drains, except for T2. And but because in the active drains there is pressure gradient, the incidence of pressure necrosis is higher compared to the passive drain. And in the sites where active drains are generally used are flaps and cavities, wherein there is a dead space and there is accumulation of fluid. You want the fluid to be drained and the cavity to collapse and coapt, whereas passive drains are generally put in peritoneal and pleural cavities. Coming to different types of drains, the tube drains are hollow tubes of varying materials which are brought out through an orifice or a stab hole. They are generally brought out through a separate stab hole. When these drains are left open, they remain as open drains, whereas when they are connected to a bag, they become closed drains. And for tube drains, it is preferable to have multiple staggered holes rather than having only one hole at the one opening at the end. Better to have multiple staggered openings so that if one opening gets clogged, other openings will still function and the fluid can be evacuated. The sheet drains, the commonest example is corrugated rubber drain, which is a sheet drain. They can be in India rubber material or it can be in the PVC material. The Yeats drain is a kind of a sheet drain where there are multiple channels or multiple tubes attached to parallel to each other attached, and the fluid drains through it. And once the fluid and also once the tubes are filled, the fluid drains around the sheet drain so that the drain doesn't get blocked even if the tubes are filled. There are flat drains available, and they are made with 3/4 or full length of multiple perforations, which can be connected to a tubing. The inner wall of this flat segment usually has ribs, so it prevents it from collapsing or kinking, and they are more commonly used in plastic and reconstructive surgeries. There are open drains which open directly to the exterior, and there is an overlying dressing or stoma bag. Corrugated rubber drain is a commonest example. Penrose drain, Goswick drain, glove finger drain, which are the types of Penrose drain, are examples of open drains, and they are mostly used in superficial wounds and cavities. The advantages of open drains are that they are simple, easy to apply, and they do not get blocked, whereas they are difficult to measure effluent, higher chances of wound infection, and repeated change of dressing is required, especially when there is excessive or more amount of effluent available. Present. These are the examples of drains. Corrugated drain. This is an example of Goswick drain. This is a glove drain. A finger can be cut. A finger of the glove can be cut and put in the generally put in the superficial cavities or in the secondary suturing. When it is done, a glove drain can be used. In case of glove drain, generally the drains are taken out through a separate stab incision. But in the cases of glove drain, especially when you use it for secondary suturing or small cavities, it can be brought out through the same incision. Closed drains, these are the hollow tubes of varying materials. They are brought out through a body orifice or a stab wound and are connected to a closed system. That bag is sterile bag. Examples of closed drains are intercostal drains, abdominal drains, urinary catheter, and Ryle's tube. The advantages are that it reduces the risk of skin infection, skin excoriation, and it is easy to collect the effluent. Disadvantages, some chance of retrograded infection. These are the examples of abdominal drain and intercostal drain. External drains. Now, even the tube drains which we put in pleural cavity or abdominal cavity are external drains, but we put certain special external drains to drain the cavities which are deeper. So for these drains, generally for draining these cavities, we use, we all know, pigtail. This is a pigtail catheter. The fluid discharge is channeled from this deeper cavity to the exterior. Generally, pigtail is used for draining the amoebic liver abscesses or any intra-abdominal abscesses where the one end of the pigtail is in the abscess cavity and it is connected, comes out externally through the skin incision, stab incision in the skin, and it is connected to a bag. T-tube is another example of an external drain where it is used during surgery, and then it diverts the bile while the distal passage is healing. Now, there are certain internal drains. These drains are placed internally to create a passage connecting the two luminal organs. Fluid is diverted from primary site to the distal body passage or cavity in order to bypass an obstruction. These fluids cannot be drained to the exterior, and so it is important or necessary to drain these fluids internally within the body. For example, ventriculoperitoneal shunts, which are used in cases of hydrocephalus. Then there are urethral or ureteric stents, DJ stent put across the strictures, and biliary stents used to relieve the obstruction in cases of obstructive jaundice where there is a common bile duct stricture or a stone is obstructing the biliary system. And esophageal stents and duodenal stents are also an example of stents which will bypass the obstruction. And one important example is pseudocyst drainage. We can see it in this picture, drainage of pseudocyst. It is being drained internally, and this is the picture of USG guided drainage of the pseudocyst. So the fluid is drained internally and surgery can be avoided. This is a picture of BP shunt and DJ stent. These are the examples of internal drains. Depending on the material, the drains can be irritant drains or inert drains. Irritant drains are made up of material that is irritative to the tissue, thereby inducing fibrosis. They are very important when you want a track formation. The track is formed easily in cases of irritant drains compared to inert drains. The examples are rubber, latex, or plastic drains. This is a picture of Malikoff catheter, which is not now commonly used in simple rubber catheters. Now we have better catheters available, so they are no longer used or not very commonly used. Inert drains are the drains made up of non-irritative materials like PVC or silastic or silicone drains. These are the abdominal and chest drains, and this is a silicone Foley catheter. In cases of drains, there are certain advances. There are different types of newer kind of drains available, or there are certain changes in the drainage bags or drainage system, wherein you can maintain the sterile contents can remain sterile when you want to send them for examination, and emptying becomes easy. So there are bags available with bottom drainage ports, wherein with the help of a syringe you can collect the fluid when you want to send it for culture or for examination. At the same time, emptying is done from bottom port, so that generally when we see the routine collecting systems have only one opening at the top and generally in the wards, mama or maushi empties it from the top and there is spillage of the contents. And if you want to send it for examination, the sterility is not maintained. But if you have a bottom drainage port, then the sterile fluid can be collected and emptying becomes much easy with no spillage or minimal spillage. Then there are drains with better materials, as we have already discussed, that silicon silastic material, which are non-irritant, and they can, even if they remain for a longer time, the body reaction or tissue reaction is minimum. Also, the drains available with multiple lumen or dual lumen for irrigation and for better evacuation of fluid. Then there are drains with various sizes. So depending upon what is the consistency of the fluid, what is the amount of fluid, the size can be selected, and such drains can be used, which will help in better evacuation of the contents. The drains with non-clogging silicone formulation are also available, because if we see at times the drains have got clots. The clots due to pus, or there are cast formed due to blood, because initially if there is blood, then the whole during drainage the blood forms the cast and it takes the shape of the drain, and it can block the drain, so the purpose of the drain is not served. So if there are non-clogging silicone material drains, then the amount of clogging is less and blockage can be prevented or delayed. Then negative pressure wound dressings are available, which act on a negative pressure principle, and the wound with a lot of discharge, and non-healing wounds or chronic wounds or big wounds where multiple dressing change is required, there is a lot of soakage in the of the wound. If we use negative pressure dressings, then the fluid can be collected in a reservoir, and it still provides a moist environment for healing, and the dressing can be kept for a little longer time and multiple changes are not required. Patient is comfortable, and at the same time, in spite of it being attached to a reservoir, the mobility of the patient is maintained. Patients are taught how to connect and disconnect this tubings and how to operate this negative pressure dressing. So it can be done not only in the hospital, but also it can be used at home. Patients can be trained and patient can be sent home with the negative pressure dressings. Then there are special types of drains available to evacuate fecal matter. They are useful generally in the patients who have diarrhea. Patients with diarrhea have continuously there is a flow, and it irritates, it excoriates the perineal skin. So if you have drains which are self-retaining in the rectal area, the liquid fecal matter can be drained and collected into the reservoir, which keeps the perianal area dry. They are generally used on medical side. They are generally used on medical side with patients with diarrhea. But also in surgical practice, I think we can use them in case of perineal wounds, where we are worried about the soakage of the wounds. It can be inserted per rectally and the effluent can be collected. The only thing is that one has to make sure that the effluent is liquid. This is a picture of a special type of drains that we talked of, negative pressure wound therapy dressing, where there is a foam used.
We're all there.
Foam used, and this is the reservoir. There is a tubing which connects it to the reservoir, and it to a suction device. This is Flexi Seal, where there is a self-retaining balloon connected to a tubing which is connected to a reservoir. This balloon goes per rectally and it can be inflated. There are channels to inflate the balloon. So one channel inflates the balloon, and through the other channel, the liquid contents can be drained and it collects in the bag.
How did I say it? What are you eating for this?
Now, after seeing what are the different types of drains, we wonder what should be an ideal drain. Since we have various types of materials, different types of drains.
Super questions, yeah.
So the drains can be, an ideal drain should be firm. It should be not too rigid or too soft. It should be smooth to minimize the fibrin adherence and allow easy removal of the drain. Material should be resistant to decomposition or disintegration. It should be non-electrolytic, non-thrombogenic, and non-carcinogenic. Now, these are the multiple criteria, and in medicine, there are many things which are described as ideal, but ideal things generally don't exist. Same is true for the drain, that an ideal drain does not exist, but we try to select a drain so that a drain which is close to the ideal drain can be used for the patient from the best available material and best available types of the drains. Coming to the care of drains, which is a very important topic, a very important aspect of drains. The placement should be proper. In case of placement of drain, it should be the shortest route. The drain should be most dependent, especially in cases of passive drains. Drain should also be free of kinks and debris and clots. Drain should be well secured. There is a method of securing the drain. It should be a well secured drain, because if the drain is not well secured, it can come out prematurely, and then it does not serve the purpose for which it has been introduced. Drain should be lower than the incision, especially in cases of passive drains. And while inserting the drain, while managing the drain post-operatively, and in fact, while removing drain also, asepsis should be maintained. The area surrounding the drain should be cleaned and disinfected. The securing technique of the drain, most common is Roman garter technique with silk, which we commonly use. Also safety pins, but they are not used now. There are drain clips, certain adhesive materials, certain suture materials of nylon are available for securing the drains in place. Securing the drain properly is the most important aspect of drain placement. The next important aspect of the drain placement is that while placing the drain, one should not injure the contents, especially when you are putting it in the abdominal cavity or thoracic cavity. Especially in thoracic cavity, blindly, you should not damage the lungs. And in abdominal cavity, at the end of surgery, when we put the drains, if you are too exhausted, too tired, and you are too routinely, you are so used to putting the drains that sometimes you become relaxed, lax, and you may put the drain through the bowel, and that happen to tend to damage the bowel. So one should be very careful while putting the drain. Putting the drain is, though it's a simple procedure, it is a very important procedure, and it should be done carefully. Coming to post-operative care of drain, strict asepsis should be maintained while putting the drain, and then post-operatively, while dressing the drain, taking care of the drain, emptying the drain, for everything, asepsis should be maintained. Because once the patient comes out, the drain, we all have witnessed that in the ward, when the drains are emptied or fluids are collected for examination, asepsis is not maintained. And if asepsis is not maintained, then the reservoir bag in which there is infection, that can ascend through the tube and go to the area where the drain is inserted, and the whole purpose of putting the drain is defeated. Dressing over the drain should be easy to apply and remove. Meticulous skin care should be taken. So if there is a peri-drain leak, then the skin can get excoriated, there can be infection, there can be abscess. We should prevent that. So if there is peri-drain leak, then an additional suture can be taken to close the gap between the drain and the skin. Also, the dressing should be absorbent and comfortable. One should measure the volume of the drain, note the character and the consistency of the drain, because this is the purpose for which the drain, one of the purposes for which the drain has been placed. So what is the consistency? What is the amount of drainage? Because if it is draining too much, the volume is too much, then we will have to replace the drain volume. So the measurement of the drain is important. If the character of the drain changes, then one has to take measures to combat that. Like if there is a lot of bleeding, that means something is going wrong and the patient may need re-exploration. If there is fecal content or biliary content after the surgery, intra-abdominal surgery, then probably there is a leak, there is fistula formation, and that needs to be attended to. Depending on how much of the effluent is collecting, you can decide about conservative management or any intervention. Maintaining the patency and regular charging of the drains is very important, especially in cases of suction drains, one should be properly charging the drains. Like for example, Jackson Pratt drain or Romovac drain, the container should be emptied, then it should be squeezed. The tubing which is getting connected to the container has to be blocked before connecting it to the negatively charged bulb or the container. And once it is connected, the tube should be opened, the lock should be opened, so that negative charging comes into action and it drains the fluid by negative suction. Then one has to, as I have said, replace the volume loss and emptying of the drainage bag to measure the volume that has been collected. Then regular activation, I said, as of the regular reservoir bag is important, because if there is too much of collection, then the bag, the reservoir gets filled fast, and then the negative charge reduces. So one has to empty the bag and reach the reservoir so that negation is maintained. Now, in our practice, we tend to send the patients home with the drain. In olden times, probably we never used to send the patients home till the drains were removed. But now, with the advent of better quality drains and with the patient's intelligence level, if it is better, then we send the patients at home. Also, in I work in a municipal setup where the beds are less, patient flow is much more. In such cases, we send the patients home. So maintaining the hygiene is one important thing that we have to explain to the patient. Also, patients are worried when you are sending them home with the drains. They are scared how to manage this drain. So counseling the patient as far as drain maintenance is concerned is very important. You have to explain to them that it's a very common thing and it is very easy to manage. And once we teach you, you will be able to manage the drain well at home. First and foremost, this patient has to be told that while handling the drain, always hands should be washed. Touch the drain after washing the hands. Then for measuring the effluent, how to disconnect, how to measure the effluent, and then how to reconnect. And if it is a tube drain, how to charge the tube drain, charge the drain before connecting it to the tubing has to be explained to the patient. Also, patient has to be educated regarding managing of the drain as far as accidental removal is concerned, because if the patient walks about or roams about with the drain dangling, or while sleeping, if the patient doesn't take proper care and a pull is there on the drain, then drain can be accidentally removed. So patient should be explained how to manage, how to handle, and also the drain can be strapped to the body with the help of some strapping, or sometimes the patient use different materials to tie them to their waist so that the drain is not pulled when they are moving around. These are very important things, and once you explain this to the patient, it becomes very easy for patient to manage the drain at home. And also one has to inform the patient how serious it is if the drain gets accidentally removed, or it is okay if the drain gets removed, not to panic and report to the doctor at the earliest possible time if the drain gets accidentally removed. Also, patient has to be educated regarding the contents of the drain, that if the contents changed, if it becomes purulent, if it becomes feculent, if it starts smelling, then patient has to report as early as possible to the treating physician, because change in the color, content, consistency of the drain is an indicative of some problem which is ongoing inside, and patient should report immediately. So patient education is very important when you are sending the patients home with the drain. Now, what happens when there is accidental removal of drain? We all have witnessed accidental removal of the drain in the wards, or it can happen at home when the patient is at home. Accidental removal or partial removal of the drain can occur, that one of the openings of the tube drains may be lying outside. When that happens, if it is an intercostal drainage, then the air goes inside, pneumothorax occurs, so that needs to be immediately replaced. If there is a partial removal of the drain, abdominal drain, then if one has to assess after how many days the drain has come out, what is the drain still serving the purpose, or it was anyway we were planning to remove the drain in a short period of time, then in such cases you can remove the drain completely, or else the drain can be repositioned or reinserted. but that has to be done very, very carefully. Also, what should you use if there is accidental removal of the drain? Because if the tube drain has come out and one is not sure whether the internal organs can be damaged while putting the drain, then one can use corrugated rubber drain instead of tube drain so as to prevent damage to the internal organs, because reinsertion of the drain is a blind procedure when the drain comes out. And one can face a lot of difficulties while putting the drain, that if you are trying to reinsert the tube drain, the tube may not go. There may be some resistance. If there are such problems, then tube drain should be avoided and corrugated drain should be used instead. And if there are problems that you are just not able to insert the drain blindly, then it is better to abandon the procedure. You can inform the seniors and then call can be taken regarding the placement of the drain, whether it needs to be placed and how it needs to be placed, what material needs to be used.
Geeta, how many more slides?
Few more slides, 3, 4.
Can you hurry up, because
yes, sure. Coming to the removal of the drain, we remove the drain when it stops serving its purpose. Generally, when quantity reduces in abdominal and peritoneal cavities, if it is generally less than 25 to 50 cc per day, the drain can be removed. The consistency changes. The drain can be gradually removed before withdrawn before removal, or it can be removed at one go. Also, when there are negative suction drains, the negative suction or negative charge should be stopped, and then the drain should be removed. Otherwise, it will cause a lot of trauma to the organ, to the wound, and also there can be bleeding. The complications of drain are immediate pain, irritation, bleeding, injury to the adjacent organs while inserting. Early complications are occlusion, infection, displacement, peri-drain leak, and fluid loss. Late complications could be pressure necrosis of the bowel or vessel, infection, fistula formation, bad scar formation, herniation through the drain site, nerve damage. During removal also there can be pain, injury to the organs while removing, because if the drain is stuck, while pulling it or while tugging it, it can damage the surrounding structures, it can damage a vessel or a nerve and cause injury. Now there are controversies regarding drain, whether drain should be put or it should not be used. The old dictum says, when in doubt, put drain. Also, it is said that better to have one and not need it rather than to need it and not have it. As this is true, it is also true that drains most of the times or at times don't drain. And if we look at the ERAS protocols, that is early recovery after surgery, it is advisable that drains are not put, because the drains at times are known to delay the recovery. So there are the doubts and controversies exist. There are both schools of thought exist. One has to take a call depending upon the need of the patient and use one's judgment to decide whether to put the drain or not and what kind of drain has to be put. The practical tips we have already discussed regarding material and how to place the drain. So to conclude, while taking the decision to put the drain, one has to bear in mind what is the purpose of putting a drain, what is the type of the drain that I will use to for this purpose, and how long one is going to keep the drain in place. Thank you.
So Naresh, you can take 1 or 2 questions. And then...
Thanks, Geeta. Excellent lecture. If there are any questions, I think, Geeta, you can go through the question chat box and you can answer them personally. But excellent lecture, quite detailed one, as usual. I'll hand over to Dr. Naresh to invite Dr. Patankar. Hi, sir.
Hi, thanks, Shishir. Hi, Roy. Good evening, and I have the honor of introducing you. So, gentlemen, ladies, Roy doesn't really need an introduction. My giving an introduction is like Suraj ko chirag dikhana, but it's a formality that I have to go through. Roy is a dear friend and excellent laparoscopic surgeon and academician. Without wasting much of a time, I would hand over the Amit. Can we have the slides, please? Dr. Roy Patanskar's
Dr. Geeta, you'll have to stop sharing.
Presentation.
Dr. Geeta, you'll have to stop sharing so I can share.
Yes.
So the best introduction for Roy today would be is talking on this topic because he himself has built a 100-bedded hospital and running it very successfully in the midst of the city of Mumbai. And so he's the apt person to talk about what to do and don't for a surgical hospital.
Thank you, Niranjan, MSS, Naresh Rao. It's interesting that my closest friends, Niranjan, Shishir, Naresh, don't ask me to speak on minimal access surgery, but ask me to speak on hospital design.
You're an entrepreneur now, boss.
I'll start with
You're
this.
an inspiration. So we need to be inspired.
नरेश, इसको सुन. बस
Yes.
इतना चाहिए तुझसे जिंदगी कि जमीन पे मैं बैठूं तो लोग उसे बड़प्पन कहे, औकात नहीं.
Yes.
Naresh, this is appropriate.
Beautiful.
So all of you viewers who are wanting to start hospitals, there are a lot of headwinds in this industry, which all of you are aware about. But it is not my job to tell you on this. I'm going to quickly take you through what little I've learned about hospital design, and we have the pleasure of building two hospitals, pleasure or trouble of building two hospitals. So it's not the Darwinian theory that the strongest or the most intelligent species that survives those that manage change. I'm going to get you later in the part of this lecture, Mr. Sandeep Diwan, who is the CEO of Omnia Consultants, who's helped us design our own hospital, and he has walked us the path of design and building and commissioning this hospital. As a surgeon, when you decide to start a hospital, in your mind, you need to decide, when I say mini, it means daycare center. 3-5 beds, single specialty, you are the only admitting person. Mid-size is 50 to 100 beds. I don't think personally there is room to have hospitals between 5 beds and 50 beds. I think that business model is, to me, not looking with a very bright future. And the big hospitals are those which are about 200 beds. You may have a single specialty surgical hospital or have a general hospital, and think about these concept of LLP, partnerships, private limited companies, and state or center run hospitals. Extremely important, the first thing is to decide whether you want to buy real estate and build your hospital or have what is called an asset light hospital. And if you see all the newer chains, look at Oyster and Pearl, look at all the new chains that have come out, they're all asset light. They don't buy land and building. They take long leases of 10, 20 years. So your ROI and EBITDAs are much better. You need to understand the floor. And most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, understand your core competence and infrastructure accordingly. The concept of building a 25, 30 general nursing home, some medicine, some gynec, some ortho, some surgery is doomed to failure. I don't think any hospital below 80 beds will remain viable. The future growth is, to me, going to be TPA, corporate or cashless patients. Obviously important to have your mission, vision, values. Get help. This is a slide I show called Circle of Competence. And each of us thinks that we know a lot about hospital design, about running a hospital. Many of you have been successfully running nursing homes, but I am pretty certain that the business model that you've been running for all these years, especially those of my generation above me, are not viable. For a youngster at 30, 35 years of age to start a small nursing home is very, very difficult. So get help, get professional help. And at this point, I'm going to introduce to you Mr. Sandeep Diwan, who is the CEO of Omnia Consultants, who's going to tell us about two areas. One is design for ICUs and design for OTs based on the NABS standards and some practical tips. Depending on the time and how much Naresh allows me, I will then summate and give you some practical points about what you should be doing when you're designing hospitals. Mr. Diwan, are you online?
Yeah.
Yeah, please share your slides.
Yeah.
So Mr. Diwan is CEO of Omnia Consultants, a company which specializes in designing PMC and turnkey commissioning of hospitals. And he has actually walked the journey with us when he built Zen through some difficult times. We've had our share of problems, and I'd invite him to tell us about OT and ICU design for surgical hospitals.
So Mr. Diwan, an official welcome from Mumbai Surgical Society. Thank you for obliging and being with us in this panel today. Mr. Diwan, you can share your slides.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do the same thing. Is it visible now?
Yeah, visible, and you're clearly audible too.
Yeah,
Go on to
thank
full
you.
screen,
Thank you,
please.
Dr. Roy, for allowing me to speak a bit on this important platform. Okay, so OT and ICU planning is a vast topic. Generally, we take almost minimum 3 to 4 weeks to conclude what this planning should be, OT complex or ICU complex. Now, to start with this discussion, I think the first point would be, what does NABH talk about it? So the first thing is, generally we come across a lot of misconceptions about what NABH talks about, NABH standards talk about. Just to briefly say, it talks about continuous quality improvement and patient safety. Also, to do that, NABH assesses the quality and operational systems are existing in the hospital. And to do this, they have created 10 chapters, 100 standards, and more than 650 objectives. But keep it in mind that these, even after doing all these things, NABH doesn't clearly gives us infrastructural guidelines. They give us what they give us. They give us processes to be followed for patient safety and quality of treatment. And specifically after lot many issues coming up all over India, they have come up with air quality requirements, which again talks about safety of the patient. So as per NABH, operation theaters are of two types. Type A, generally we used to call it as major OTs. These are neurosciences, orthopedics, joint replacements, cardiothoracic, transplant surgeries. And type B are gastrointestinal surgeries, ophthalm, and daycare surgeries. Now, to go ahead with type A, what is the ideal space required? Ideal space required is somewhere around 400 square feet. That is minimum area we are talking about. And the smallest or shortest face of that rectangle should be 20 feet or 6 meters. For type B, the size should be minimum 300 square feet, and the shortest face dimension should be 15 feet. It's 4.5 meters. But when we say these are the areas for hospital OTs, but simultaneously it requires lot many other support areas, that is pre-op and post-op areas. As we all of us know that pre-op and post-op are required and everything is doing it, but what is the number of beds? The number of beds will be determined by the business plan, what you work upon. And that I think Dr. Rai would be in better position to explain. We need to have a sterile store which should be directly connected to the CSSD. Surgeon and staff change with toilet. Obviously, this comes out of sterile zone. It is non-sterile area. Then scrubs for OT, preferably minimum one scrub for 2 OTs. Then equipment bay, counseling and briefing area. This is very important area because generally in India, with one patient on the OT table, there are minimum 2 to 3 relatives waiting outside. So you need to brief them, counsel them. Dirty corridor area, if possible, because not every real estate is capable to handle dirty corridors separately. And lounge, because a lot of surgeons like you guys are visiting for the surgeries, and you better need to have some recreational area, some lounge area. That's why it is if possible. Then for operation theaters, engineering services are required. Now air conditioning, this is where NABH is very, very specific about. That it has to have a ceiling suspended laminar flow with return air ducts. It has to have HEPA filters through which supplied air should be coming with 99.97% efficiency HEPA filters. Allowable air is of 0.3 micron variation is allowed. Every OT should have a separate AHU for minimum 20 air changes. And when we say 20 air changes, every air change, we should have a 20% of fresh air introduction. That is, we are talking about 4 fresh air changes happening in every hour. There should be a differential positive pressure inside OT. That means the outside corridor should be less pressure than the OT area. Temperature inside OT should be 21 degree plus or minus 3 degrees Celsius. Humidity should be 55%. Then electricity, obviously we agree to this thing that uninterrupted electrical supply should be there, but all pendants and equipment should come with UPS. And also, if not written over here, hello. Also, if it is not written here, but we have to ensure that there is an additional earthing provided for all the OTs. Additional points should be considered for cautery, X-ray, for laser cautery, obviously differently. Firefighting, this is a very important area. We need to have smoke detectors with fire panel. We can't provide sprinklers inside OT, but smoke detectors should be placed inside OT as well as on top of the ceiling, that is above false ceiling, and in the corridor area and every support area what we have discussed. It should come with the fire alarm panel. Then there is MGPS, medical gas piping system. All medical gas lines with isolation walls and alarms should be placed. Then it comes to OT structure and elements in it. Floor, it should be anti-static conductive flooring only. Ceiling, it has to have plenum, and rest of the area should be covered with antibacterial false ceiling. Door should be hermetically sealed doors. There are two types, either sliding or openable. Walls, either brick walls, plastered and painted with antibacterial paint, GI panels painted or powder coated, SS panels again painted, powder coated, or left as it is. High pressure laminates, glass, there are various options available in paneling. Then surgeon control panel, which should cover temperature, humidity, clock, elapsed surgery time, medical gas alarm, peripheral lights controls, and telephone system. There should be a separate X-ray viewing screen for all the bus box and storage. Then we come to intensive care units. Types, all of us know about SICU, MICU, CCU, PICU, NICU, etc. What is the number of beds that you should have in every ICU? There is no specific guideline about it, but all practical purposes, it should be restricted to 12 to 15 from management, clinical management perspective. For area, every bed should have 100 square feet area, that is 10 feet by 10 feet. This is only bed area. Along with bed, there are other support areas like nurse stations, dirty utility, counseling and briefing area again, isolation cubicle if possible for infective patients, storage, that is linen and medical storage, and equipment store. Then regarding ICU, there are a lot of planning principles that we need to keep it in mind. When we say what should be the location, as per the fire safety norms, we have to have on the lowest possible floor with a single secured access, because we need to, in case of fire, evacuation needs to be quick and efficient. There should be windows available. Windows is not necessarily openable windows, but windows with fixed glass. But we need to have some external view, external light, which should be available for patient for better orientation. Then bedhead panels should be there. So once bedhead panels are planned, why planning principle? Because then accordingly we have to plan for the medical gas piping and electricity. Monitoring. Along with every patient bed has a multi-para monitor, but simultaneously we need to have a central monitoring at nurse station. So obviously, according to this planning, we need to lay the communication lines. Visibility. Preferably, every patient should be visible directly from the nurse station. Patient should have privacy curtains or partitions for better privacy. There should be enough space around bed typically in emergency treatment, whenever you want to intubate a patient, you need to have minimum 1 foot space from the bedhead panel on the head end of the patient. Also, dialysis, if at all it has to be planned, it has to be planned in advance for ensuring supply and drain of water. ICU again has got engineering services. It has got, again, air conditioning is critical. We need to have AHU in place, air handling unit, and AHU should be capable to handle 6 to 8 air changes per hour with minimum 2 to 3 fresh air changes. Why 2 to 3? Because there is a lot of door opening in case of ICU. So there are some air changes happening from that side as well. Then the whatever supplied air is there, supplied air should be through proper filtration of AHU, that is up to 10 microns. Temperature 21 degrees plus or minus 3 degrees, humidity 55%. Again, electricity, uninterrupted supply to be ensured. Bedhead panel, all electrical points should be through UPS. Firefighting, again, smoke detectors inside, outside, and above false ceilings with fire alarm panel. Lighting, very important, examination light on every bed, a separate examination light, along with ambient lighting. Again, medical gas piping system, O2, compressed air, vacuum lines with isolation valve and alarm panel should be provided. Again, number of outlets for O2, compressed air, vacuum lines will depend on the type of ICU we are planning. Like electrical points will also depend on the type of ICU we are planning. I think I have tried to be as minimal as possible and quick as possible. Thank you. Dr. Roy, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dewan. I think I'm not sure how much I should actually speak because it's already 10:40. So maybe Naresh, we can just take questions because I'll take another 20 minutes. It'll be too late, really. Naresh?
Yeah.
Roy, people are still listening to you. You can give some practical tips.
Not a problem.
Yeah, go ahead. I think you can take about 10 minutes more, I suppose.
Roy can take 10 minutes, I guess.
Why? He can take 15 minutes also. Doesn't matter.
Well, okay, fine. So when you're planning a hospital, and I'm sure I know there are many people who are actually in this stage, think of all these things. One is it feasible to be successful in the area that you plan? Once you do your feasibility study of looking what your competition is, what your demographics are, the next stage is project planning implementation. And then is what I call the shakedown period when you actually build, and it's the fit out period. Before you actually start, there's no revenue going to be coming in. And although you have a loan waiver, the interest still have to be paid right through. What do I mean by feasibility study? Look at your demographics. What is the need assessments? When I started a hospital in Chembur, I had to look at my competition. I had to see where the corporate hospitals are, what my strengths are, and what the needs of the community were. There's somebody's noise coming in the background. Can we mute everyone, please? So this is important that you actually do this. I actually had to apply for a lot of debt to various financial institutions. And that process, the discipline that came into planning and very careful budgeting was something that I'd never learned in medical college. I think most doctors are pretty useless businessmen, probably with the exception of Niranjan Agarwal. But all of us, I didn't know how to read a balance sheet. So this is extremely important. Before you actually do this, and I would strongly suggest that you hire a professional PMC company to do this. Broadly, this is your main divisions: admin, outpatient, diagnostics. And remember, your hospital will make money only in laboratory, radiology, and pharmacy. You make no money in beds. You'll barely break even on OT and beds. But your real money is going to be in laboratory, radiology, pharmacy. So please treat them as important profit centers. So this is, you also need a lot of backup services, which you don't worry about in nursing homes. Size around 100-bed hospital, which I think is probably has a best class model to survive. You need to think of outsourced kitchen, outsourced laundry, storages, security, parking, landscaping. All these are extremely important. So I'm going to keep this short. I think Ms. Divan has taken you through this, but I think some things I need to emphasize on are the CSSD department, which are extremely important. I think this is our OTs. I think we spend most of our life in the OT, so it's important that try and cheer up your OT. One wall, for example, we have made a glass wall with a scene. This is various equipment that is there. Ideally, have a recovery and an ICU on the same floor of your OT. So we have a surgical ICU opposite OTs, and we have a medical ICU opposite the cath lab in Zen. So this is broadly how you should be doing. You shouldn't be moving patients up and down when you do this. The CSSD is divided into a dirty area, a semi-sterile area, and a sterile area. And ideally, we have a chute. Our CSSD is on the 8th floor. Our theaters are on the 3rd floor. We have a separate chute which carries all our material, the dirty laundry, by the chute to the CSSD, where it's processed, and a good linen comes down by that area. Just to give you a very brief layout of beds, the age of having a very large general wards may not really be true. This is the gross pattern of how bed should be. There should be, as you enter, it's pretty much like going to a 5-star hotel room. When you open the door, you have a corridor, you have immediately a toilet there, which has external ventilation. And then you have the beds, as you can see me doing. Important that when you do your beds, remember your trolley positions. Remember the bed needs to be pulled out in the case of a cardiac arrest or a code blue. Your patient movement trolley must go between beds and around beds without hitting areas. Sewage and fire are two compelling problems that all of you are going to face. I think with the spate of fires happening in the last 2 weeks, I'm sure we already had a major compliance and fire audit of our hospital done last week. You have to do an electrical audit and a fire audit, and please do it more than what is required. For example, have sprinklers and smoke detectors in all corridors and patient rooms. Your ICUs and OTs will have smoke detectors, but please overdo this. I'm sure not only NABH, but even Mumbai Fire Brigade in the years to come will make fire NOCs more and more difficult. There are things like fire retardant doors that tend to be placed on the staircases. Your electrical ducts must be sealed with fire resistant material. Seal the duct between floors. I can go on and on. The second thing you need to think about is a sewage treatment plant. So hospitals outside Mumbai, more than 50 beds. Inside Mumbai, more than 100 beds, but I'm sure these norms will be revised downwards. So it makes a lot of sense to actually have a sewage treatment plant in your own hospital. It's a one-time cost. The maintenance is almost negligible. I'll keep my slide short. The bad cost, as I see, is having a fancy office, I spent a lot of money and on what kind of taps to use and what kind of tiles to use and what kind of cladding. It's all completely useless. 6 years in running this hospital at near 100% occupancy, I've realized that the aesthetics is secondary. The first and the most important thing is quality of medical services, and second is your functional design. Your trolley movements, your trolley position, the running of your MEP, the oxygen ducting, the fire ducting, please concentrate on that. The aesthetics, your people will go. Also, we as surgeons, we tend to focus on non-core businesses. It is the rule of life that 80% of your profit comes from 20% of your business. It is your job as a CEO of the hospital to find out what that 20% of businesses are giving you 80% of your bottom line and focus on that area. This is extremely important. There's something called blue ocean strategy. Now, when typically a surgeon starts a nursing home or a middle-sized hospital, he will be competing with other nursing homes. It's like a glass tank full of small sharks. The sharks, in order to carry food, will bite each other, hurt each other, injure each other, and make each other bleed in order to survive. The really smart shark actually makes his own tank, separate from the others. So you need to tweak your business model. You need to understand what the deficiencies in your area. For example, when I started my hospital in Chembur, I realized there is no good NICU in a 5-kilometer radius. I had no interest in obstetrics or NICU, yet we started an NICU only for that reason, perceiving the need of that area. We also started OPD dialysis, which I realized was a waste of time because there was no money in it. So we stopped our OPD dialysis and converted yourself only to an IPD dialysis facility. I'll stop here. And this is my email ID and my number. Feel free to send me mails or ask me questions at the end of this. And thank you, MSS, Niranjan, Naresh, and Shishir for having me here today.
Thank you, Roy. Excellent presentation, and you have covered most of the point. And like I said, you are now an surgeon entrepreneur. So a lot of inspiration and questions will be asked. There are already several questions. For example, from Alauddin, Tungekar and others. I would request them to directly address them to you off the panel. And I'm sure you will be able to answer.
Naresh, before you wind up, we have Dr. Abhay Dalvi with us, who is the president of ASI. And today an event has taken place where he has retired from KEM Hospital. He must have got physically retired from KEM Hospital, but I'm sure, knowing sir at KEM Hospital as a student, he can never retire from there mentally, you know. And neither would the students retire from his memories, and they would all look upon him like we do look upon him as our mentor. Sir, please address us and give your blessings. Dr. Dalvi, sir.
Sir is not around, I guess.
I think, Niranjan, we should move on.
Yeah.
And let's plan for the next meet. This was an excellent meeting and very, very superbly done. I thank all the panelists and my co-chair Shishir for sparing this time and the effort to make this forward. All these talks will be finally put up on the website of Mumbai Surgical Society as soon as we have them. And it will be a continuous process, so anybody can access it and, you know, possibly address the questions to the speakers, because it will be in the name of the speakers also, along with the title, what they have spoken. And I'm sure we can always improve on those talks and make a very nice archive, maybe first of its kind. Let's plan, and I would bid good night to all of us, including my present
I just
president.
want to thank Mr. Diwan for joining us today.
Yes.
On a Friday evening.
Right.
Naresh, Dr. Avinash Supe is also there in the delegate link.
I saw sirs. Yes, sir.
So, sir, we acknowledge your presence. Thank you for joining us. And at the end, we must also thank Juventus Pharmaceuticals for graciously agreeing to host this program every week for us throughout the year. So thank you, Amit. Please convey our regards to Mr. Goa. And thank you everyone for joining us. See you again next Friday, 7th of March with new topics. Thank you. Rajesh.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining the program, and thank you all the speakers and the chairpersons. We expect the cooperation, and I know, knowing y'all, you all will never let us down, and we'll keep on bothering you, especially Dr. Roy, Dr. Shishir, Naresh, and of course, Sir, Dr. Abhay Dalvi and all. So thank you again all for attending this program. We'll see you all again on 7th of May. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.
Is she looking good?
Smart.
But smart, always